All right, I am here. Sorry for being a few minutes late. I was out visiting some friends and got caught up in some stuff, and it took a while just to get ready and be here. So sorry about that. That's what happens when you live stream, I guess. All right, so I already see a bunch of comments from Meat Machine. So, all right. Yeah, okay. So several comments there, but let's get right into it today, and then we'll see if we could bring people up. And I decided to go for, and this might make it a short broadcast today. I don't want to get into the routine of always having the same guests. So I'm going to have kind of a rule, unless it's a special occasion or something like that, like it's a holiday special or whatever. I want it to be no 2 consecutive weeks with the same guest. So if you're here last week, I don't. I just want to not have things get stagnant and have it be really repetitive. So I'd like to try that out to see if that works. I'm also thinking in the fall. Let me adjust the camera. I'm up a little too high. And I don't have my lights on. Give me 1 second. I am so not ready. Okay. All right. All right. So yeah, I want to have more conversations with people, but I don't want it to get stagnant and always have the same people. And part of the reason for that is I've seen other live streams where it's always the same cast of people, and that can be fun for a while. But then, it kind of things can get stale pretty quickly. And I really want this to be a place where people that are new to the channel or maybe only want to show up once in a while don't feel like there's like the regulars and they don't feel welcome among the regulars, or they would feel uncomfortable. They don't want to be around a group of people. I might also try a few other formats, like talking to people one-on-one, that sort of thing. It'd be really cool to do kind of like a call-in, like the anti-realist call-in. Like, there's like the atheist or Christian shows, like with apologists or atheists, where like Christians call in or atheists call in and they're like, evolution, that kind of thing. I might do that for metaethics or moral psychology or something. That would be a lot of fun. Okay, so we'll see where all that goes today. But I guess I'll talk about, a few updates. So one is that I did 2 videos this week. So I did a discussion with Josh Knobe, who you may or may not have heard of Josh Knobe, but Knobe has been at the forefront of experimental philosophy and has done a lot of pivotal work in the field. So, experimental philosophy, it's probably something I mentioned on here. If that sounds strange, experimental philosophy, it almost sounds paradoxical. It's a sort of movement within philosophy that arose in the past 20 years, where you address traditionally philosophical questions using empirical methods. Typically, the way that the field is developed, mostly the tools of psychology, primarily like social psychology, but occasionally you get like behavioral neuroscience and that kind of stuff, like with Josh Green's work. So it's a really cool field. I like it a lot. As you might expect, I end up being super critical of it. So, my dissertation work is pretty critical of research in my area. So, I started critiquing philosophy by appealing to psychology, and then I started critiquing the psychology that I used to critique the philosophy. So whatever I get, I end up critiquing it. I will probably write a critique of my critique at some point. I just like critiques, I guess. So I did a discussion with Josh Knobe. We talked about some topics other than metaethics. So that might be of interest to you. We talked about metaethics for the last, 30, 40% of it. But for the first part, we talked about personal identity and free will. And Dr. Knobe went over some of the research that's been done in those areas in experimental philosophy, describing some of the research paradigms that have been used and some of the results. So check that out. It's in the channel. I know a lot of these are listed in live, which makes them, I don't know why YouTube changed that. They changed it to where you have videos and then you have live, and none of my live stuff is in the videos. I don't know if there's a way to get them over into videos, but if there is, I would love to do that, because people go to your videos and they don't see the lives, and then they don't know that you have videos. Like most of my videos are live streams. Anyway, so check that out. That was posted 4 days ago. I'd like to get more views on that. I'd like to get more likes on that. And I'd like to get more comments on that. So go check it out, especially because, for a lot of it, I talk more in the second half of it. But in the first half, you hear a lot from Knobe. And so you're getting a different perspective, a different, you're hearing a different person than me. It's not just me all the time, like the live streams. So do check that out. I really enjoyed the discussion. I thought it went pretty well. And then I had a second discussion this week with David Sakris, where we talked about whether or not there are moral judgments. And David Sakris ended up getting into some of the research on psychopathy, the moral conventional distinction, and a few other things. yeah. So anyway, it was a really cool discussion, and it went in directions I didn't really expect, and I thought that that was really cool. And it goes along with a paper that David Sakris wrote about whether there are moral judgments. There's other work on that too. I left links in the description for that, so check that out. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about agent and appraiser relativism, and I had a blog post on this. Did I put it the link? I did put the link in there. No, I didn't. I frequently forget to do that. So 1 second, let me dig that up. I got to find that post on agent relativism. It was from, I will get it. And in the meantime, let me say hi to the people that are here. Meat Machine, hey, it's good to see you. And thanks for coming on the show last week. 1 second, I have some goofy comments here. Is this about being relatives with James Bond? It is not. Actually has nothing to do with that. All right, so we got Jonathan Becker. Hey, how's it going? Did I see you? There was in the Matthew. It's the deliberation under. Is it a deliberation under ideal circumstances? Is that the chat? Were you in that chat with David Paulman? Because I think I saw the beginning of that, but I didn't get to finish the rest of it. All right, we got from Antonio. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. You sent me an email. I never responded to the email. I'm so sorry about that. There's no excuse. I just didn't respond to it. I'm sorry. Did you want to talk today? Because we could totally do that. Like just you and I, if you want to. So let me know if you want to do that. I got damn. I don't know what the context of the damn is, but okay. All right. I'm so sorry for not answering the email, but I'm here now if you want to talk. Okay, so I knew it. You show up for all the metaethics stuff. It's really funny. I showed up in a couple live streams this week, and in both of the live streams, I'm not kidding, it was 2 of them. One of them, I forget what they were. I don't even remember what they were. But I remember 2 streams I went into, and I was like, I wonder if they're talking about metaethics. And then I go into the stream, and I'm listening. And then in one of them, they said objective morality within like 3 seconds. And in the other, I think they said realism. Yeah, but see, this is a special, I'm already breaking the rules. You had wanted to talk to me like just one-on-one, and we weren't able to do that last week. So this week it would be fine to do that. And besides, nobody knew about this rule. So I'm introducing the rule, and then it will go into effect next week. So I think that would be fine. Especially because this week, the content, I don't have a whole ton to say about the agent relativism distinction, but let me get the link for that posted. Here it is. So do check out the blog post on this. And they put this emote thing with the hearts like right behind. Oh, that's so stupid. Yeah. All right, should be pinned. So check that out. If you're wondering about that incredibly lame image, that was me. I created that using Canva, and it had some sort of agent looking thing. Oh, that's right. I ran out of time, but I was going to start this wearing sunglasses too. Anyway, so it's kind of long, whatever. I'll just read it and we'll see how that goes. And let me see. Do I want to read this? No, I could just talk about it. All right. So, okay, you could talk today. Awesome. Okay, so let me talk about this. And I'll just make this one short. I'm not going to read the whole blog post, and I'll just talk about this distinction. So there is this issue in the way that a lot of moral realists critique moral anti-realist positions. And as you may know, I don't endorse any of the standard anti-realist positions. So the standard anti-realist positions are, maybe I should quiz people, because error theory, non-cognitivism, these days people just say expressivism. But let's go with non-cognitivism. Let's be old school. I should comment on that. For some reason, like textbooks and a lot of the sort of lay discussion on the topic, they use the term non-cognitivism, but everybody just says expressivism in the academic literature as far as I see. So I don't know why people haven't made the shift. I think expressivism rolls off the tongue a little easier. So I like the term better. There are differences in I'm not a historian of metaethics. Maybe I should be a bit. I don't know. But, when I think non-cognitivism, I think A.J. Ayer and R.M. Hare. So I think universal prescriptivism and like really old school, like 100 years ago, old school, maybe less than that, but emotivism. So just old school emotivism and universal prescriptivism. But modern expressivist accounts will attempt to maintain some degree of non-propositionality to moral claims, they might incorporate like a deflationary theory of truth, which lets you say like murder is wrong is true. They try to sort of update the semantics and other features of the way that these non-propositional accounts work. Why don't they call it non-propositionalism? That would be very descriptive. Maybe that's just too long. So they try to update. There's newer, more sophisticated and fancier versions of these traditional views. And so when a lot of people critique those views, it's a little strange because it's like critiquing an early view of the theory of evolution and not paying any attention to the last 150 years of development after Darwin. It's like say, Darwin made mistakes in Origin of Species. Well, probably, but and so what? Does that mean the theory of evolution is wrong? No, because the differences might be relevant. So I don't know why people are sticking with these old school critiques. Anyway, so one of these critiques that's just profoundly bizarre and really, really bad is that realists will say something like, look, if you're a moral relativist, then if someone else wants to steal from you or lie or whatever, you have to think it's good for that person to do so, because moral relativism would hold something like each of us, our actions are right or wrong relative to our standards. Now it's ambiguous, and I'll talk about the distinction between agent and appraiser relativism. Sometimes this is interpreted, and there actually is a form of relativism, agent relativism, where you would say that an action is made right or wrong by the standards of the agent performing the action. And technically, it could be the cultural standards of the agent performing the action. And the way that would work would be, let's say you have two people, Alex and Sam. And Alex thinks that murder is wrong, and Sam thinks that murder is not wrong. Now, if Alex is an agent relativist, then Alex would think that it would be wrong for Alex, like themselves, to commit murder because they think it's wrong. But it would not be wrong for Sam to commit murder because Sam thinks murder is not wrong. And whether or not it would be wrong for Sam to murder depends on Sam's moral standards. And since Sam doesn't think it's wrong to commit murder, then it's not wrong for Sam to murder. And so if Sam was out murdering, Alex would have to say it's not wrong for Sam to do that because Sam doesn't think that murder is wrong. And so on this view, this agent relativist view, each of us is kind of a private legislator of our own morality. Only we judge, only we determine the rightness or wrongness of our own actions. Like each of us prescribes the law for ourselves. And then the presumption there is that because if Sam thinks murder is not wrong, it wouldn't be wrong for Sam to commit murder, then you as an outsider, if you're Alex or me or you in the audience, if you observe Sam committing murder, you have to go, well, technically it's not wrong for Sam to commit murder. So you have to be okay with Sam murdering. That is agent relativism. Now, if you're thinking that's ridiculous, well, I'm inclined to think, why would I not care if someone else commits murder just because they don't think it's wrong? I don't care if they don't think it's wrong. For me, the problem is that I think it's wrong. And this is the distinction between agent and appraiser relativism. So appraiser relativism holds that an action is right or wrong relative to the standards of whoever is evaluating the action. And this could apply to policies, character traits, and so on. So I'm focusing on actions just because that's how contemporary analytic philosophy is developed. But really it's just, okay, what is it that the moral facts are relativized to? For the agent relativist, they are relativized to the standards of whichever agent or the culture of the agent performing the actual action. So if Alex thinks murder is wrong and Sam thinks murder is not wrong, then it's wrong for Alex to murder, but it's not wrong for Sam to murder. And that almost becomes an almost bird's eye perspective. So it's almost like, and I've sometimes called it this, a la carte realism, where each of us chooses our moral standards. And then once chosen, everyone else is in a certain sense obliged to respect them, because our deciding on or our preferring or our valuing a certain course of action or our having a certain set of moral standards is what it is that makes it genuinely morally right or wrong for us to commit those actions. And other people are in a certain sense obliged to respect that. And so at sort of one level, our actions, the rightness or wrongness of our actions is relativized. But at another level, because they are relativized to each of us, but actions are right or wrong relative to the agent performing the action, they are in a certain sense genuinely right or wrong relative to that agent. And so everyone else must respect the fact that, for instance, it is okay for Sam to murder people because Sam thinks it's okay to murder people. That makes it okay for Sam to murder people. And so it is okay for Sam to murder people. And you better be okay with it. You have to think it's okay. That is agent relativism. But that is an unusual form of relativism. I mean, it might be that some people endorse that, and you could probably find people endorsing that. But take a look at this remark from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. That to which truth or justification is relative may be the persons making the moral judgments or the persons about whom the judgments are made. These are sometimes called appraiser and agent relativism, respectively. Appraiser relativism suggests that we do or should make moral judgments on the basis of our own standards, while agent relativism implies that the relevant standards are those of the persons we are judging. Of course, in some cases, these may coincide. Appraiser relativism is the more common position, and it will usually be assumed in the discussion that follows. And so you see, there's this distinction in the literature between agent and appraiser relativism. And what do moral realists routinely criticize when they criticize relativism? Agent relativism. And it's the one that is easier to point out that if you're an agent relativist and someone else thinks it's okay to murder people, you think it's okay for them to murder people. And then that's supposed to be the reductio. You think it's okay for some people to murder people. As long as they think it's okay, then it is okay. If you think that that's a super implausible and awful view, because it would mean that like it's okay for murderers to murder people, it's okay for thieves to steal, as long as they think it's okay for them to do it. If you're a cultural agent relativist, then if there's a culture where they engage in cannibalism or torture people for fun, you would have to think it's okay for them to do it. But that's not the only type of relativism available to you as a relativist. You can also be an appraiser relativist. And if you're an appraiser relativist, you judge everybody by your standards. And so you would think it's wrong for me to steal, it's wrong for them to steal. In principle, you could have standards that apply to some people and not others. You could say, relative to my standards, it's okay for me to steal, but not okay for other people to steal. That's actually logically consistent. But there isn't anything logically inconsistent with being an appraiser relativist and then thinking it's wrong for anyone to steal. And so if you're an appraiser relativist and a moral realist shows up and says, oh, you're a relativist, so, if someone thinks it's okay to murder a bunch of people, you have to be okay with that. That's false. It's not true. You don't have to be okay with someone else murdering a bunch of people. So part of the issue here is that for the appraiser relativist, you can evaluate moral claims in this way. You can kind of translate the moral claim. And so the way that works is you treat the moral claims as having an implicit indexical element. So what does that mean? Well, when I say I am Lance, it's true because I am Lance. And the word I, when I use it, is referring to myself. When you use the word, you're referring to yourself. And if you're not Lance, then the statement would be false. And so we could take that one statement, I am Lance. And that statement is true when I say it and false when someone else says it. So the truth value varies based on who is making the statement, but it doesn't mean that the statements are contradictory. And that's because the word I is functioning indexically. When I use the word, it refers to myself. When you use the word, it refers to yourself. And the same is true of words like we and you and they and those sorts of things. Those words have an indexical element to them that allows what they're referring to vary in accordance with contextual factors such as who the speaker is or who you're pointing at. If you say that tree, not that, like if I say that tree is green and that tree is not green, that could be true, even though I said that tree is green. And like if I say that tree is green, that tree is not, or sorry, that tree is green, that tree is green, and one of the trees isn't green. It could be true when I point to the first one and false when I point to the second one. And there, the gesture is being incorporated into what I'm communicating, and the truth value can function, can vary as a function of what I'm pointing to. That's big, that's small. That could, that's not a contradiction. And it's the same thing with I, and you, and we, and those sorts of words. Now, what a appraiser relativist can do is treat moral claims as having this implicit indexical element so that when you say murder is wrong, this could be translated to something like I consider murder wrong. And now we can evaluate moral claims in this way. If I go around saying, look, I think murder is wrong, or I go around just saying murder is wrong. And what that's saying is like, there's like in parentheses, I think murder is wrong. Well, I do think murder is wrong. So the statement is true. So I just add in the I think, or I believe, or according to me, or it would be inconsistent with my standards to commit murder, something like that. But we could just say I think. So if I just went around saying I think murder is wrong, I think murder is wrong, or I disapprove of murder, that is true. I do disapprove of murder. But if I say I disapprove of murder, that has nothing to do with the truth status of someone else saying I disapprove of murder, because when that person says I disapprove of, they're referring to themselves and not me. And so if you're an appraiser relativist and someone else says, I don't disapprove of murder, and let's say it's true that they don't disapprove of murder. The statement is true. It is true that they don't disapprove of murder. But notice the sense in which it's true. It's trivially true. All for that person. Now imagine that person says murder isn't wrong. That implicitly just means that it's as if that person is saying that they don't disapprove of murder. Now, if it's true that they don't disapprove of murder, again, that is trivially true. It is, in fact, trivially true that people who do not disapprove of murder do not disapprove of murder. And so if the statement, murder isn't wrong, when that person says it, is simply referencing that person's personal moral standards, the statement is true. But what are the implications of that? The implications are no different than the implications of if the person just straightforwardly said that they don't disapprove of murder. So, moral realists will laugh at, they'll mock relativists by saying, if someone comes up to you and they say, I don't think it's wrong to take your wallet, so hand over your wallet, you have to give your wallet up because they think it's okay to take your wallet. That's nonsense. If you're an appraiser relativist, that would be like a person saying, I don't think it's wrong to take your wallet. Does that give you a reason to give them your wallet that they don't think it's wrong? Who cares what they think? I don't care. It's really, really bizarre. And what's troubling about this is that professional moral philosophers will just say relativism has these problems, and they won't say, hey, I'm criticizing agent relativism. And if they were to say I criticize agent relativism, imagine they just said that. And they said, look, I'm criticizing agent relativism. Agent relativism is the view that moral actions are morally right or wrong relative to the standards of the agent performing the action, or something like that. If they were to say that, people might say, okay, well, I see a lot of problems with that. But if they said agent relativism, you would think some audience members, maybe people that don't know much about metaethics, or people that do, might say, well, what other types of relativism are they? Oh, well, there's appraiser relativism. Well, does that have the same problem, that if someone thinks murder is okay, that you have to be okay with them murdering? Well, no, it wouldn't have the problem. And so why are professional moral philosophers, there's two categories of thing. One of them has this really big problem where if someone thinks it's okay to murder, then you have to think it's okay for them to murder. The other position doesn't have that implication. That is supposed to be the sort of reductio or the fatal flaw in that view of agent relativism. And then you just ignore this one and act like this is the only type of relativism. It's misleading. I don't understand how professional moral philosophers do this, how they speak and they criticize relativist views it's misleading. It's misleading. Now, I want to be respectful to my colleagues, but this is an issue. And the issue is there's a few things that could be going on here. Are they not aware that there's other types of relativism and that these criticisms aren't applicable to those other types of relativism? Because if they're not aware of it, it's a little weird for them to be going around critiquing anti-realist positions when they're framing and discussing and describing them in ways that are not accurate or that are reflective of their own misunderstandings or inadequate understanding of the topic. Now, if they are aware of it, don't they have a responsibility to critique a position in a way that isn't misleading? It's one or the other. Unless there's some third alternative. There is technically a third alternative, which is they disagree with my assessment of these categories and distinctions. Maybe they think an appraiser relativist does have to think that if someone else thinks murder is wrong, that the appraiser relativist has to think that murder is wrong. I just think definitionally that's not true. I don't even think it's controversial. Now, what they might say is you have to agree as an appraiser relativist that if someone says murder is wrong murder is not wrong, or let's even say the person says murder is good, right? So we go find a person that thinks murdering is good, and that person says murder is good. If you're an appraiser relativist, you are obliged to agree that when they say that statement is true. So the statement murder is good on the appraiser relativist view is true in some cases. Now, does that sound super implausible and really terrible and awful? It might sound that way, but you have to understand what the appraiser relativist is committed to. All the appraiser relativist is saying is that when that person says murder is good, what that person means is something like, I approve of murder. Now, so if you just take the sentence, murder is good, and say, the appraiser relativist thinks murder is good, that's super duper misleading. No, they don't think murder is good. They think that the statement, the utterance, murder is good, can be true when it is asserted by someone who is using appraiser relativist semantics, or maybe they're imputing those semantics on that person, and that person approves of murder. And all it commits them to, is understanding that the statement murder is good, when that person says it, means that that person approves of murder. And as I said, that would be trivially true if the appraiser relativist is correct in their descriptive account of the meaning of moral claims. It would just be descriptively true. And then what would be like, this is because the implication here is, again, normative entanglement. The implication is that if you're an appraiser relativist and you agree that the statement murder is good can be true, that means that you, the appraiser relativist, are okay with murder, at least in some cases. That there are cases where someone goes out and they like chop someone up and put them in a suitcase or whatever. And you're like, no, it's fine because murder is good sometimes. And that is not at all what an appraiser relativist is committed to. An appraiser relativist can say this without any contradiction. Murder is always bad. I hate murder. I oppose all murders. No one should ever murder anybody. I dislike violence. Nobody should ever be killed. I'm a transhumanist and I want everybody to live forever. And if I had superpowers, I would make sure nobody ever died. I would wish for 0 deaths in all of history and I'd resurrect everybody that died in the past and none of them would ever die again. All of that is consistent with being an appraiser relativist and agreeing that sometimes the statement, murder is good, is true. All of what I just said is consistent with saying, yep, and sometimes the statement murder is good is true. Why? It might sound contradictory, but that's because people are just not appreciating that on this view, the statement murder is good has an implicit indexical element. There's no contradiction any more than if I say I am Lance and it's true, and you say I am Lance and you're not Lance, that it's false, that's a contradiction. That would be absurd to say that that's a contradiction. That would be absurd. And it's equally absurd to imply that an appraiser relativist somehow has to think murder is good in some non-trivial substantive sense. They absolutely don't have to think that. They don't have to think that, and they probably don't think that. And I think it's really, really bizarre that, again, I have to emphasize, this isn't just people in a non-professional context. It's professional moral philosophers will imply, they won't often explicitly say, and if they did, it would be extra weird and wrong, that if you're a moral appraiser relativist, you somehow think murder is good sometimes or something. Nonsense. Okay, so that is the distinction I want to draw attention to. And the reason I want to draw attention to it is because what I'm trying to do is to mention week after week after week, I'm building up an arsenal of the kinds of points you could make that I never see anti-realists make in the academic literature or in online debates or anything. Anti-realists are always doing Mackey's argument. They will try to come up with these like specific analytically framed philosophical arguments. This is not an issue where anyone gives a damn about the arguments for and against realism. This is an issue where there's so much refuse to clear out of the way in advance. There's so much just debris of rhetorical framing nonsense, bad arguments, and misleading, misrepresenting rhetoric. It's all this just nonsense of trying to make anti-realism look bad. Think about what I'm describing. This misleading Necker cube vacillation between agent and appraiser relativism, of not mentioning appraiser relativism and then only targeting agent relativism and then acting as if you've critiqued relativism in general, which you have not. Critiquing one form of a view isn't critiquing the whole view. Imagine I find one particular physicalist position that's kind of goofy and some paper from 1962 that's a very weakly argued early physicalist account in the contemporary space, at least. I'm sure there's physical accounts before that. And then I find a bunch of flaws with it and I say, yeah, I've refuted physicalism. Would anyone take that seriously? No, of course not. Critiquing one old paper from 60, 70 years ago that is superseded by a million developments since then is not a critique of the view. I could just find the first, Dan Dennett paper ever on illusionism and, rip shreds through it. Does that disprove illusionism? No. Even if you think illusionism is wrong, it's not wrong because Dan Dennett wrote his first paper wasn't the most compelling version of it. And it's the same thing here. It's not reasonable to target one form of relativism and act as if you've targeted all of it. But note there that I'm not even responding to the objections to agent relativism. You could just grant them for the sake of argument. The problem isn't that there's a good or bad argument against agent relativism. The problem is that the way in which philosophers are framing and discussing the philosophical issues that they're talking about is in various ways misleading. It's misrepresenting the state of the literature. It's implying things that aren't actually true. Implying an appraiser relativist is pro-murder or something. It's not a logical entailment of the position. And so insofar, but here's, part of the problem with implying this. It's not like you have a syllogism, therefore the appraiser relativist personally thinks murder is good or something like that. You're rarely going to see an explicit argument like that. What you see are implications, and the implications are usually carried by the pragmatics of how an audience is expected to receive a sentence. Think about what I'm acknowledging. I am acknowledging explicitly that an appraiser relativist, if a person that approves of murder says murder is good, and they say murder is good, we have that sentence, the person said it, murder is good. The appraiser relativist thinks the sentence is true. That's true. Does that mean appraiser relativism is absurd? Well, what does the sentence mean? The sentence means it's a person that approves of murder saying that they approve of murder. It's trivially true. It's as trivial as if a person named Frank said, I am Frank. It's trivially true. So what is the objection exactly? What's the objection? There is no legitimate objection. If they have the correct semantics, and that is what the person means, then it is what the person means. What's the further objection? So there's no objection here. I don't know what realists think that they're doing. I think it's transparently misleading for them to critique it in this way, and yet they do it anyway. So what the hell is going on? This is not a legitimate criticism. This is just sophisticated straw manning by professionals. So if I seem a little agitated, I mean, look, I'm not an agent or appraiser relativist, but what is going on when we have a professional field of philosophers where everyone I keep seeing anti-realists focus on engaging with realist arguments. Like, I'm going to critique the realist argument, I'm going to make an argument for anti-realism, and no one discusses the framing, the context in which these disputes occur. It's a kind of, I'm commenting on the kind of sociology of the metaethical dialectic, and I just don't see anyone comment. I've literally never seen a professional philosopher draw this distinction to raise this, because it doesn't mean they don't. But I mean, it's almost worse if they are and nobody's responded. I mean, both situations are weird. Imagine people keep making the same point as I do, and then realists keep making these bad critiques. And even anti-realists will make bad critiques of So this isn't like if you're a realist, you're going to make these critiques. Anti-realists will make these terrible critiques of relativism, and they'll do the exact same thing, as if relativism is absurd because agent relativism is, ostensibly absurd on this view. So that's ridiculous. So I don't know, but no one comments on it. So again, if they are commenting on it and they keep doing it, that's a problem. If they're not commenting on it, what's going on there? Like, why? I had never seen anybody reference normative entanglement before I did. We've got decades and decades and decades of moral realists saying, hey, the anti-realist thinks torturing babies isn't wrong. And I mean, one, that's just super ambiguous. And two, what they're implying frequently is they're implying a bunch of false entailments that don't follow from being an anti-realist, or that at least don't follow in a way that isn't question begging against the anti-realist. Okay. I've said enough about that. Let me catch up with the chat. Oh, okay. So sorry, here's the thing I got to do. Because people might be listening to this without watching. I need to start saying the names of the people and saying that there's a comment. I'll be reading a comment. Okay, so this is a comment from Sandels, and this was in reference to them earlier. They had said damn, and then I said I didn't know what the context was. So Sandels says context for the quote damn was this wasn't about quote being relatives of James Bond. Okay, gotcha. All right, so we have a comment from Patrick. It's Patrick. Well, whatever. Okay. Hey, Patrick. I don't know if you've commented before, so if you're new to the channel, definitely welcome. And Antonio, I'll get to you in a minute because I finished up talking, and we'll have probably about 30, 40 minutes to talk. Maybe a little bit more, but probably not much. Yeah, probably about 30, 40 minutes. Okay, so we have Patrick. Patrick says, maybe I am an agent relativist about food. I don't like shellfish much, but I recognize in a sense that it's delicious, or about what's funny. Well, someone is laughing, so it must be funny in a sense. That makes sense. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. All right. So we have a comment from Antonio. I've usually encountered the view you describe as subjectivism. Is there a difference between that and appraiser relativism? No. So I'm using relativism as an umbrella term to encompass all types of relativization, and that could include both cultural relativism and individual subjectivism. So the way I'm using that terminology, this is like semi-proprietary. I've seen other people use this terminology, but in metaethics, there's no consistent use of terms for pretty much anything. Even the term stance independent, I just started using that and then stuck to it and just deliberately stuck to it. I'm noticing other people do it, so I don't know if I'm jumping on the bandwagon of everybody doing it or whether I'm contributing to that. Maybe it's a bit of both. But stance independent is becoming the term people use instead of mind independent, which is the term they used to use. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting too in the weeds here. I would say relativism is the broad category. Then you have two subcategories that are the main two, which is subjectivism, or you could say, just to be extra clear, individual subjectivism, and that locates moral standards in the standards of agents or appraisers at the individual level, and that's why it's called individual subjectivism. I prefer the term subjectivism for the individual views, where it's relativized to the standards of individuals because it's the subject, right? And then I use the term cultural relativism to refer to views that locate the rightness or wrongness of actions in the standards of cultures. And that, again, could be the agent or appraiser version. So you have at least four types of relativism there. You have individual agent subjectivism, individual appraiser subjectivism, agent cultural relativism, and appraiser cultural relativism. Now, do keep in mind that if you're a relativist, you don't have to pick one of the four. You could endorse relativization with respect to both cultures and individuals, and you could endorse relativism with respect to both agents and appraisers in principle. There might be some issues with how you cash that out, but it's probably at least possible to try to endorse. You could even have a hybrid semantic view or pluralist semantic type view. There's probably some things you could do that would allow you to mix and match with those different views. But the other thing to point out is that you could in principle relativize moral standards to something other than cultures or individuals. You could relativize them to like humanity as a whole. You could relativize them to religions. You could there's weird ways you could relativize things in principle. You could relativize standards geographically. Like maybe you think there's different moral standards in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, or there's different moral standards based on like social class, or there's different moral standards based on, I don't know, your beliefs or some other commitments or values that you have, or people could, I don't know. I mean, you could relativize things in all sorts of ways. And you could even relativize standards to something other than individuals or cultures. You could relativize standards to books. Let's say it's like a video game world, and there's like each region that you're in, there's a code of conduct that is given by whoever created the game. Let's say it was an impersonal force, created the game, right? And then there's 10 continents, and in each continent, there's a book that has the rules of conduct for that particular content. Well, now you could talk about what's right or wrong relative to the contents of that particular book, which isn't even a person and wasn't even written by a person. And so then you could talk about rules being right, like moral standards being right or wrong relative to the book in the fourth continent versus the ninth continent or something like that. The bottom line is, as long as that murder is wrong, well, that maybe there's one of the continents murder's not wrong or something. It's like this really anarchic, chaotic continent where murder's not wrong or something. So like in that case, then the standards would be relativized to something other than individuals or groups. And so you could relativize, like maybe I'm overcomplicating this, but sometimes people undercomplicate things and they don't say it enough about how much variety there actually is. All right, we have KCA Randy says, greetings, Lance. Hi, and welcome to you. We have a comment from Mr. Gustaveller, who says, what do you think about moral particularism? So I take that to be a normative moral theory. I'm not really talking about those right now. If I do a stream on normative moral theory, then I'd be happy to talk about it. Roughly what I would say is I've never found those views very appealing. They usually end up looking to me very ad hoc and unprincipled, and I don't like them on those grounds, but those grounds might be largely aesthetic. So I don't know that I actually have a good reason to dislike them. All right. We have a comment from Danny. Is relativism compatible with moral realism? What about subjectivism? Yes, they are compatible with them in a certain sort of sense. So this is a little tough to get into, but you could have it be the case that moral standards. So I draw the distinction between relativist and non-relativist, and I'll do another 5 minutes, and then I'm going to switch to Antonio if you're there. Oh, okay, great. So Antonio just came back about 4 minutes ago, so that works. Awesome. So I'll let you in about, so we'll say 5:50. If I take too long answering this, I'll wrap it up. Danny and I can always just talk later anyway. All right. So I take relativism to be the view that moral claims have an indexical element. And this is taken from, it's actually a supplemental section that I think was eventually removed from the Stanford Encyclopedia entry, I think on moral anti-realism. Is that right? From Richard Joyce. It's a really, really cool passage. If someone can find it, if you know what I'm talking about, please post it in the chat. and I can even pin it for people. It's such a good passage because it clearly lays out this distinction. Anyway, so relativism has to do with whether moral claims are understood to be indexed or non-indexed. And so if they're indexed, then that allows the truth status of the claims to vary relative to whatever it is they're indexed to. So if you're an individual subjectivist, then you would say that they're indexed to the speaker. You could say you could even call it speaker relative. I mean, maybe that's more technical distinctions here. But let's just say that when I say murder is wrong, I'm referring to myself. And if someone else says murder is wrong, they're referring to themselves. I think it is wrong, and they don't. Let's say they're lying. So now when I say it, it's true. And when they say it, it's false. The same sentence, murder is wrong. And that's because when I say murder is wrong, it means something like murder is wrong according to me, or murder is inconsistent with my standards. And that is true. It is inconsistent with my standards. But for someone else that thinks it's not wrong, it is consistent with their standards. And so the statement's false if they say it, right? So it has that indexed element. I take a non-relativist position to simply not index moral standards. There's like, they just don't have that indexical element. And in both cases, they could be realist. There could be realist forms or anti-realist forms. So how would that work? So a realist form that has non-indexicalization is easy. That would be a typical realist form. But you can also get an anti-realist form that has non-indexicalization. And so what would that look like? Well, that's also pretty straightforward. Something like ideal observer theory, maybe certain forms of divine command theory. These are what Joyce references someone else, and I don't remember who Joyce references. I think there's only one or two papers that use the term, but I really like the term. Joyce uses the term, which again is borrowed, so check the entry, of a relation designating account. And the way that works is this. Imagine someone says, look, I think whether an action is morally right or wrong depends on what God commands of us. Okay, well, if there's only one God and God commands the same thing of everybody, I mean, never mind that, because that could conflate us contextualism. But let's just say there's one God, God has one set of rules, God issues the set of rules to us. Well, now if you go around saying murder's wrong or murder's not wrong, there aren't like different ways of indexing the statements. It's not like I am Lance and you are not Lance. There's like I and you, and that terminology doesn't make sense because there's only this one standard that we're all referring to. And so it no longer has that indexical element implicit in what people are saying. And yet the standards are still stance dependent. They're still dependent on what God's commands are. And if you want to think of divine command theory because of certain theological commitments about the nature of God as some type of realist position that somehow makes them stance independent, fine. Then we could just switch over to ideal observer theory. And we could say that an action is morally right or wrong if an ideally rational and fully informed agent would favor that action. And then you could think something like, that whatever that agent is would favor the same actions independent of who the speaker is or who the agent is. And so there's the same set of correct moral actions for everybody. Again, this could be sensitive to context. That's not the issue. It doesn't mean that it means that anybody can do anything. I'm not going to get into that context sensitivity issue because that's a whole other thing to get into. But the point there is just that all moral claims would still be relative to the standards of this agent in a certain sense. I mean, I say relative to, but they wouldn't have, the language would no longer have this indexical element. And so you can get, so it's stance dependent and non-indexical, and you could have stance independent and non-indexical. So that gives you your realist and your anti-realist non-relativist positions. And then with your relativist positions, your typical relativist position would be stance dependent because it's the stances that things are relativized to. But you could also, in principle, have some kind of non-stance relativization. It's a little weird to try to offer one of them, but I mean, maybe it could be something like, maybe this would work, is you could say that actions are right or wrong according to the nature of an agent, and then it's not their stances that make it true. So maybe some teleological account might be able to yield this kind of it would be like realism, but it wouldn't have I would say it's relativistic and realist at the same time. And so you could have that. It might be a little strained, but you could pull it off. So there's kind of a matrix of the four features of stance dependent, stance independent, indexed, non-indexed, and you could have any combination of those. All right. So yeah, you can have all those. And for the record, Joyce explicitly says this in that entry. I just agree with Joyce. It's one of the rare cases where I read something and I'm like, yeah, that seems right. And then I just repeat that. All right. Let's get Antonio here. So I'm going to copy the invite into the stream, but it's only for Antonio. None of the rest of you are coming here. So too bad if you want to. So you can come in a moment. Anyway, thanks, Danny, for the remark. Oh, right. Welcome. Welcome.
Oh, hi. Thank you for having me again, for breaking your rule. Uh,
It's my rule, so I can rescind the rule, and then now I start a new rule, which is that the rule starts next week. So you're not
right.
breaking the rules. I got rid of the rule. It's
Those are,
awesome to be in charge of the rules.
yeah, right. Those are very stance dependent to however you feel at that particular time.
Exactly. All right, so let's get talking. So yeah, last week, if you were here last week, we had like I just decided to open the floodgates and 5 people showed up, but now it's just you and I. So let's hear it. What do you want to talk about?
Oh yeah, is my audio okay? I think we had some issue with that last week. Am I
Um,
coming through?
your sound. So I'm getting a little bit of this like kind of noise. Other than that, it sounds fine to me. How about the audience? Because if it sounds fine to the audience, I can put up with imperfect audio. I don't care.
Yeah, I don't really know how to.
Whoa! Now you sound way better. I don't know what you did.
Okay, well, I brought my microphone a little closer to my mouth.
Oh, okay. Now it sounds
Yeah,
perfect. Now you
that's
sound better than I do.
that's the only thing I can do here.
I do have a microphone here, but see, hold on. It's stuck.
Yeah,
The
well,
wire, yeah.
you're a professional streamer, and I've never.
I'm a professional streamer with terrible equipment. I have my webcam. I don't know. I think it might be able to do 1080, but I don't know if I'm paying for that. And then I have a microphone, but it's supposed to be closer to my mouth and it's too far away. So I have bad lighting, bad background. I mean, what is this background? There's just like a random door, or I'm not even pointing there. That door. This is a terrible setup. I see all these professional streamers that are like actual professionals. They have all these awesome backgrounds. Everyone always has cool LED lights. So I'm gonna have
Right.
to do it at some point. But I can't. I'm not going to get into that. When I can afford it, I will do an updated studio and it'll look really cool. And it'll have like whatever people always have, like weird things in the background. Anyway, whatever. Okay, talk to me. What's up?
Yeah. Okay. So actually, I think we've come a long way, and I think I'm at least I feel like I'm a lot closer to understanding where you're coming from, and I think I'm also a lot closer to understanding sort of what my own perspective is, and sort of how we can discuss this issue with a common vocabulary, which maybe we didn't have at the time, because again, I'm new to all of this, so I'm still like I'm still trying to understand the various positions. Uh, but I really like what you were saying toward the end of when we're still having that discussion last week. Uh, when you mentioned the idea of morality being the outcome of some kind of negotiation, I think I think this is pretty close to what I'm getting at. So there's just a couple more things that I want to add to that to sort of qualify that a little bit and maybe put some constraints on the kind of negotiation that we're talking about, right? So, and my point, I think that's where we sort of we had to end it because I didn't want to take all the space on that stream since there were a lot of people there. But um, what I wanted to say there is that this particular kind of negotiation is one that is gonna have to need some ground rules, right? Because if it's just if it's a pure negotiation without any kind of like limits on sort of how the negotiation has to take place or uh, what sort of what sort of outcome and what the negotiating process is like, right? Then we run the risk of it being ultimately dictated by relative power relations, right? And
So I could give you roughly my view is that simply that agents act in accordance with their goals or their desires or their values, or whatever you want to frame it as.
yeah,
And in practice, hopefully, um, from my point of view, again, this is all relativized to the standards of different agents. There aren't any agents for which there is such a power imbalance and a look, someone could have a lot more power and then just not want to use that power to harm other people to get what they want. So someone might just,
Oh yeah,
like,
for
let's say a
sure,
person
for
is a
sure.
utilitarian. Let's say you have, like, Superman powers and you're a utilitarian. Well, you're not just going to go around saying, like, I want free Starbucks or I'm going to punch everybody in the Starbucks. Like, you're just not going to do that because you don't want to. And so hopefully, on my view, that people would be like that, but they might not be. And so for me, I just think agents act in accordance with their values, and there are going to be facts about how agents can optimize for achieving their goals and values, given potential conflict with other agents with different goals and values. And there are going to be, like, game theoretic optimums that are going to be true regardless of what those agents think. There's going to be, like, optimal strategies, and those will be stance independent. Like, it's not up to you which strategy is going to work best to convince someone. It's up to what the world is like and what that person is like. It's not up to you. It's not made true by your values. Um, it's also not made true by that person's values, not necessarily, because a lot of this is going to be externalized effects about what the world is like. So, this negotiation thing, there are going to be certain sorts of facts there that are not just arbitrary whims of individuals.
Yeah, no, no, I completely agree. I'm not. I certainly don't believe in the idea that, like, if we don't have some kind of strong realist morality, will all devolve into like the Hobbesian state of nature or anything like that. I think my issue is more so when I say like power imbalances, I think I construct that loosely enough that, like, well, if you have two people arguing and one of them is just better at arguing and convinces the other, like they could convince the other even if they have, like, even if their arguments are actually worse, right? That I mean, you've been in philosophy long enough. I'm sure you've seen it happen, uh, and so that's also part of what I'm getting at. So I think we do need to posit at some point the idea that, like, this negotiation could happen, but the outcome could still not, that that there is sort of, that if certain things, certain conditions aren't met, then the outcome of the negotiation is not actually valid, right? And so or at least the outcome of the negotiation, like that's not, because of that the way that negotiation happened, it can't really count as sort of a moral outcome, right? It can't really count as a moral discourse. Um, I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but I mean, to maybe put a little more meat on what I'm talking about, I think, um, in order for the disagreement to be moral and for the means of resolution of that disagreement to count as constituting moral discourse in some way, I think we do, at least, like, minimally, right? I'm not trying to, like, define like a whole range of outcome, but I think, like, the some kind of minimal condition that we have to set is, like, some type of criterion of impartiality, right? Some kind of idea that, like, if you are to make a distinction between two agents, between two people, or between any kind of two situations, right? You have to justify that difference on the basis of some kind of objective feature, right? You cannot just say, well, it was okay for me to do it because I'm me, but it's not okay for you to do it because you're you, right? That's, if you're doing that, you're putting yourself outside of the range of moral discourse. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. I don't know why would I agree with it, would be my concern. Like, are you asserting that this is true? Is this a proposal for how we should go about discourse? Because like, someone could just say, yeah, it's okay for me to do stuff, and I don't think it's okay for other people to do the exact same thing. I just have double standards. I don't think there's a logical inconsistency there. And if you want to say,
No.
well, then they're stepping outside of moral discourse, I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
Hmm. Well, what I would say to that is, like, if you're just admitting to a double standard, then, like, there's no conceivable reason why anyone would want to agree with you, right? Or unless they happen to, like, benefit from the double standard as well. Unless you're saying, okay, let's all agree that, like, whatever Americans do is right and whatever non-Americans do is bad.
Mm-hmm,
Like,
mm-hmm.
uh, But like, yeah, like at that point, I guess you could say like that moral system might count as a moral system within the boundary of like American society, say, because then you have rules that apply to all Americans. But I wouldn't consider that a moral system. Sort of, I wouldn't consider that a universal moral system, I guess.
Yeah, I guess what troubles me about this is I'm just not sure what work it's doing to say like it counts or doesn't count as a moral system. So, I mean, if you're making an analytic claim about the definition of a moral system, I don't know if I'm even going to buy into an account like that. Like, I don't know what standards I would use to judge what is or isn't.
Maybe,
Like analytically, if you're stipulating definitions, then of course it's going to be true because you're just telling me what you mean by the terms. If you're proposing like a prescriptive suggestion for how we use words, I mean,
yeah.
maybe I'll use words that way, but it doesn't seem to me to be very practically interesting. So I'm just not sure. Part of what troubles me about the way a lot of people engage in these discussions is that they want to try to box things and label things. They want to put the moral sticker on some types of talking and not have the sticker on other kinds of talking. And I don't think the stickers do anything. They're just stickers, you know? And so whether a person says, I've got double standards, and you say, oh, well, then you're not engaged in moral discourse. Okay, well, then maybe they're not. But what then?
Well, I do think there's a utility in distinguishing a realm of moral discourse, because I think, like, to the extent that like we're you know to the extent that we're going to have um, things that we want to achieve collectively, uh, we are going to want to agree on a set of rules for society, right? That's obvious, and we are going to need a we're going to have to need to need a language to discuss those rules, and to discuss sort of why should we adopt those rules and not different rules, um, and yeah, like if those rules are based on criteria that are arbitrary, right, that are based on simply the identity of a particular agent or a particular sort of or yeah, the identity of specific people involved, then I just don't think we're going to get anywhere with that, except reinforcing power relationships, or it might be rhetorically useful in some contexts. I like, say something like, well, yeah, I'm just better than you, so I deserve better stuff than you. But like, well, even that is a moral claim, because you're calling yourself better than. But yeah, that's not even that, right? So yeah, if someone were to like openly like propose a double standard, then yeah, I don't see why anyone would want to agree with that. Like, I don't see why
They
anyone
might
would.
not.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I would favor what I would say is there are going to be facts given any set of agents with a given set of values. There will be facts about that set of norms, institutions, and rules that would sort of that they would all be willing to agree to in principle. And there could be facts in some cases that there are no such rules, like there just are no sets of rules they would agree to. And if you do have, let's say you have two people that want to negotiate on a price, they don't always reach an agreement. Now, in principle, there
yeah,
often will be a price that they would both be willing to accept. But sometimes the price, like my minimum selling price, doesn't overlap with your maximum buying price, and then we just don't agree. And that's
yeah, for
when
sure.
negotiation breaks down. It could be that if two people, like, two, bank robbers steal $1 million, and one says, I want 80%. And the other's like, no, 50-50. And they're like, okay, 75, 75-25. And the other's like, no, 50-50. And it could be the 50-50 one says, look, it's 50-50 or we're going to have a shootout. And like one of us is going to die probably. And it could just be that's what those agents are like. One will not drop under 75. One won't go over 50. Done. There's no further discussion. And it could just be agents have preference profiles where there just is no negotiation to have. Where there is negotiation, that negotiation will be contingent on what those agents are willing to agree to. And it's possible in principle that we could have it, like, imagine in our society, like, there were like an alien race had like colonized Earth or something. Like this species took over the Earth, and we like mostly drove them back. But now there's like 1% of them make up the Earth's population, and they're super duper powerful. Or let's say it's like a fantasy setting, and there's like a bunch of beings like Thor or something come down from another world. They might just say, "Yeah, we get a like maybe they're jerks and they just want a special set of rules," or like some superhero thing, like the boys or something like that, where
Yeah.
the supers just have they live by a different set of rules. We could all agree. Look, you get to have certain privileges, like you're like you don't get charged with murder. Would I like that? No, that would be horrible. But it could be that we recognize that the power asymmetry is so great that we better make some concessions, and then they might be willing to live under those concessions rather than just saying that they're just going to do whatever they want and they're above the law. And so I don't think that the standards agents all do or would agree to, like as a matter of principle, must be fair by my standards, because the negotiation could be one where a person has leverage on you. Look, think of a situation where we're both on a desert island. Someone else has all the water and I have no water, and they want to get, they want to charge me way too much for water. They could say, okay, then if you don't want to pay the price, then die, and I will. I'm probably going to pay the price if I can. Like if I literally can't, then I can't. But if I can, I will, because I have to. I don't really have a choice if I want to live. And so there are situations where people can exploit the power asymmetry to get a negotiate, like to get a deal that's not really very fair. I'm just saying that's a descriptive fact. I'm not endorsing that, but that's just could be the situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like again, I'm definitely not making any kind of descriptive claim. I'm trying to like circumscribe the discussion to specifically prescriptive questions, because yeah, again, if you're gonna try defend some kind of a universal moral standard on descriptive grounds, it's just not gonna work. But so what I would say to situations like that is that you have, and actually the price realism one is actually also really interesting parallel to make here, because yeah, we can recognize that there's a situation where, for example, there's a monopoly situation, right? So sort of your water situation where you're forced, you're forced to pay basically any price to get the smallest amount of water that will allow you to survive, because that person has all the water, right? So in that case, um, again, like the fact that you you're willing to pay the price, but you also recognize that it's not fair in a sense, right? That there's an imbalance there, right? I think that's, and that's different from what you want, because if maybe what you want is sort of getting the water for free, right? Or yeah, not having to pay anything, because obviously, like, you always want the most stuff for the lowest price, like that's almost almost tautological. But you can also step outside of your own perspective and understand that this person probably traveled some amount to go and sell this water, and so probably acquired this water in the first place, so had to incur some costs for it. So you can recognize that on some sense they do deserve some compensation, right? But at the same time, that they're overcharging you, right? So there is, you have this mental construct of like what a fair price would be, and maybe maybe you and the water seller will forever sort of disagree on sort of what that correct price is, and in that case, maybe there's no fact of the matter, or if there's a fact of the matter, it's just outside of our it's sort of beyond our capacity to determine. But we do have a sense that like there is such a thing as a fair price, and it's not necessarily the price that I want, and it's not necessarily the price that I'm gonna pay, but it's something else, right? That we can discuss.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that all sounds fine to me, but a lot of this does sound to me like descriptive claims. Like people might have a sense of fairness. That could be true, but I don't think that that's tracking. Like, I'm just denying moral realism. Like, I'm just denying that there are facts about what standards we ought to conform to independent of our goals and desires. If someone wants to say that, hey, we have various preferences for what standards we should live by, I'm fine with that. But I guess I'm not understand. Like, are you trying to defend a realist account here? I'm not sure if there is a disagreement, and if so, what the disagreement would be.
So I would okay. Let me try. Let me shift gears a bit, because like maybe I've been I've been putting the cart before the horse, because I sort of started I started from the perspective of what how the discussion from last week was set up, and before that we had earlier sort of comments comments exchanges. So let let me try another sort of way of putting it. So we have you know okay, I'm really gonna be careful. I'm not great at thinking this thing through on the fly. So if I was going to
Take your
write a
time.
comment, I would spend a long time trying to figure it out. Um, but okay, so let's take the question. Let's go back to sort of the descriptive realm and think about like a basic question, like, okay, is the Earth flat or is the Earth round? Like, theoretically, I could go through all my life and only make observations that are at least compatible with the idea of that the Earth is flat. I wouldn't be a very observant person, of course, because I can look at the horizon on a sea and see a ship sort of emerge from the Earth's curvature. But let's say I'm not a very observant person. So if I am that person and I just don't make any observation, I believe the Earth is flat. It seems obvious to me, and I've never encountered any observation that would disagree with that. Then should I, or I shouldn't say should, because that's descriptive, but because that's prescriptive. But I um I'm still aware that there are other people who claim that they've seen sort of that they've that there are astronauts who have been to space and have seen the Earth as round. Like there are people who have made this observation and calculation, know that the Earth is round, right? And so the question is, am I going to take these observations into account, right? Are those informations, do they sort of have any bearing on me? And of course, I can choose to ignore them. Like I maybe like right, that's what flat earther actually do, right? There's this concept of zeticism, I think, something like zetics. But yeah, basically the idea is that you should believe only your own observations and no one else's. Which, I mean, it's I guess it's a way of thinking. But yeah, either way, so you have you can choose to do that, or you can choose to adopt the principle that, okay, if I believe someone is insincere and someone sincerely reports an observation that is incompatible with the claim that the Earth is flat, then that is a reason for me to disbelieve that the Earth is flat, right? And me adopting this principle is totally up to me, right? I can choose to ignore it, right? But if I do adopt this principle, then I can start sort of, I can take into account other people's perspective, and from there, uh, I would argue, arrive at something that is closer than the truth. But that again, that's again, I can only say that because I accept this axiomatic principle that other people's observations, in principle, matter as much as my own. So my argument is basically that you can extend this basic reasoning to the emotive or perhaps evaluative realm, right? That I can say, um, I can choose to live my life thinking that only my own desires matter, right? And only my own goals and desire matter, and that's there's nothing in principle that forces me to do that. But I can also choose to accept the idea that in principle other people's desires, goals, values, whatever, also matter um, as much as mine. And so if there is then a prescriptive framework that is in some fundamental way incompatible with uh, with this principle, then if I accept this principle, I can sort of, yeah, I can know to reject that. So if I have, say, imagine I have the desire to torture babies for fun, as the saying goes. But yeah, if I have this desire myself, and I think only my own desires matter, then yeah, I can go ahead and do it. But if I accept that like in principle, like the feelings of the baby while it's being tortured is as real, and maybe not as real, but it matters in the same way as my own feeling, then I can actually evaluate those two feelings comparatively and decide that, well, yeah, like the baby's desire not to be tortured is probably greater than my desire to torture them, right? And that's a choice that I make, right? It's not, there's no cosmic force that compels me to do it. But if I do make this choice, then I believe that this is how we get to construct morality in a sense that is, if not universal, at least aspiring to be universal, I would say. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it just I wouldn't consider that realism.
Yeah, I'm not attached to any kind of label. I'm just, I'm not like here to defend realism or anything like that. I've had this view before. I haven't had the vocabulary until recently, so that's why I wanted to have this discussion. It was to sort of to figure out if you thought that this view was compatible with your own perspective, and if so, sort of, yeah, if we have some kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it might have some similarities to some like Kantian views. It it might be closer to some type of constructivism. I don't know if it would come out as some type of realism. But
Yeah,
if a person is going around trying to figure out what to do, I just think that a person is going to have that. Like you say, it's a choice here, but I'm not sure it's a choice. Like I sometimes will say, oh, if you just choose to think this or to do that or whatever. Uh, I don't really choose my preferences. Like I don't choose what food preferences I have. I don't think I have that power. There might be ways in which I could somewhat control my food preferences. Maybe if I really don't want to eat a certain kind of food, I could work up a way to like get myself to find it gross after a while by thinking about how terrible I'll feel if I keep eating some food that's not nutritious or something like that. Maybe I'm able to shift my food preferences a bit, but some people don't like cilantro and they're not going to like cilantro no matter how much they choose to like it. Like that's just not an option. They don't
yeah,
like it.
no, no, of course.
And so
uh
if a person is just some sort of like mega egoist and they only care about themselves, they might just not be able to choose to care about other people. They don't have to regard like I mean, I get real wary real quick when people start saying like, okay, well, I have my preferences, but and I value my welfare. Well, shouldn't I recognize that other people's welfare or other people's well-being is valuable? It almost treats the value as something independent of a standard or a stance. And I find that really strange. I don't think agents have value any more than like I think like a cup like I don't think that's intrinsic value. I
yeah,
think
no,
agents value cups. And so I can, and in my case, fortunately for the rest of humanity, I do value other people's well-being. But one, I don't think I could choose to if I didn't. Um, and two, to the extent that I value other people's well-being, it's simply that I value it. It's not that I like recognize or discover that it has value independent of
yeah,
my valuing of it or anybody else's.
yeah, no, what I'm saying is you choose to value it, and I think, I mean, you're absolutely right that we don't have like complete control over what we value. So some preferences are just hardwired into our brains, and I mean that's a very real like issue. Like, I mean, I was just making the baby torture example, but I mean there are people whose like unconscious desires sort of would lead them to behaviors that would harm others. But we also do have a part of ourselves that is sort of somewhat more conscious and somewhat more able to sort of choose their own values in a sense, right? We have both, right? um and so I mean, ideally, I think, it would be best if we just like spontaneously valued everyone else's feelings as much as our own. But of course, I mean, we're just not built that way, right? We feel we feel the pain, the pain on us directly. We can only sort of speculate on the pain that other people are feeling, and that's, and some people have more empathy than others, just as a natural feature of their psychology. Um, but even then, I can recognize intellectually that those two things. Um, and it's not a purely intellectual act. Of course, it always has an evaluative and therefore emotional component. But I can have this sort of second order emotional um, drive to try to value other people's desires and emotions as much as my own, even if other aspect of my psychology go in an opposite direction.
Well, I think that I approve of people caring about other people's welfare, but and you might just agree, I just don't think that like I ought to. Like if other people do, great. If I could,
I
good.
think, you know,
But I
like
don't. Yeah, I don't
I
think it's
think,
facts about what we ought to care about.
well, I think once we establish that this is something that we can do, I think what I'm not attached to the ought label at all. I think I really like that Anscombe paper. I think I don't know if you've come across it, but that says that the problem with a lot of our moral language is that it's essentially inherited from Christian morality, and most philosophers today are not Christian, right? But they still inherit this moral language that is based on the idea that there's a God that gives you commands and that you ought to follow, and that language is not really adapted to a secular way of thinking about morality. So maybe, so I don't like talking about oughts all that much. Um, what I prefer to say is simply that we have certain desires that are that bring us toward morality, and other desires that bring us away from it. And uh, you know, and once you have like constructed morality as that, like the drive to sort of consider other people's feelings as of equal importance to our own, I think the rest follows. So maybe you can say like this is one of the like trivial, because you say like all forms of moral realism are either trivial, unintelligible, or I forget what the third one is. But maybe you want to say this is
False.
one of the trivial, yeah, or false. Yeah, maybe you want to say this is one of
Yeah. Well, so it is sounding a lot like what you're proposing. I can't tell if you're making a descriptive claim or a prescriptive claim, or maybe a bit of both. But those claims are consistent with anti-realism, and so like I'm not. I guess I'm just not clear on what the proposal is. Like, if you're just saying, "Hey, people should try to care about other people, and to the extent that they can," that sure, okay. I don't know. Probably that sounds good. But I'm not sure if you're saying anything more than that.
well, okay. So my argument is that like that is what morality is, right? And that, I mean,
I
maybe I
see.
like I'm proposing some kind of conceptual engineering here, maybe that like we should think of morality as the uh this impulse to value other people's emotions as much as our own.
There we
And
go. So when you say it's conceptual engineering, then we're moving into to prescriptive territory. We're saying, hey, why don't we opt to use language in this particular way? And I'm fine with people making those proposals, but note that that's just orthogonal to the realism anti-realism dispute. And I'm a little like, if you're just saying, okay, fine, I don't care about that, let's just use language this way, then that's a discussion to have. We're not going to be able to finish it today, but we can continue it. Um, and maybe that's where are you basing this off the like my negotiation suggestion that like, okay, we set aside the realism dispute, and then I'm saying it's all about like this negotiation stuff, and then you're suggesting that one of the things that we incorporate into this is a conception of morality as an attempt to cultivate concern for the welfare of others, something like that.
yeah, I think that's a good place to start. And there's a lot of things that I'm still like trying to figure out myself, so I don't want to like come here as like having, okay, I figured it out. This is my theory. I want everyone to adopt it. The reason I really wanted to talk with you is like partly to have it challenged, right? Because I think,
Mhm.
I've been giving these things some thought for, a good few months, let's say, and I was just interested in, yeah, seeing a perspective that apparently seems very different from mine, but and seeing if like there's a way of like coming to an understanding again. Basically, I mean, I don't believe that like there's a way, um and I think it's come up in other discussion before. There's no real like knockdown argument in philosophy, so I don't think that like if you're not interested in picking up what I'm putting down, then that is what it is, and vice versa. If I'm just not gonna buy in on the negotiation framework, then that's what it is. But maybe like there's a way of coming closer in some ways, right?
Sure. Yeah. For me, a lot of the questions, and we could wrap it up here, and I'll give you the final word on this, and then I could close out the stream because I got to go in a couple minutes. Um, for me, when I'm thinking about the conceptual engineering stuff, we start getting into practical questions. It's like, so you could ask a question like, if we stop using free will language and the language of moral responsibility, would that have positive or negative consequences? For me, questions like that, I'm not intending for you to answer that. The consequences of changes to how we speak or how we think, for me, are largely psychological questions, which makes them empirical questions. And working out the positive and negative, like, you wouldn't favor this proposal if it led to like widespread chaos and mayhem, presumably, right?
I guess not, and that is, yeah, that is
But
something that, yeah,
you see that, so
that's
now
a,
the consequences are going to hinge on what the actual practical impact of the adoption of this proposal would be. And that's, this kind of conceptual engineering stuff is really dicey because it involves making it, we have to engage in basically speculative sociology and psychology. And that's tough. That's tough. That's not easy to do.
all right. Well, yeah, I mean, in that case, all I can say is like that is how I think of it, and I think my personal understanding has been enhanced by thinking of it this way, and maybe there are other people who will resonate with that and adopt that way of thinking. But I mean, maybe you're right, and maybe actually, like, if everyone thought in those terms, they would actually all be worse off for it. That would be unfortunate, but.
I'm not proposing that they would be. What I'm saying is that it's difficult to have a conversation about, hey, we should all use our language this way, or we should adopt this conceptual schema or something like that. Like, I'm perfectly happy to entertain it. Like, we should maybe do this or maybe do that. The only issue is that for me, whether we should or shouldn't use a certain type of discourse or think in a certain way is going to turn on what the consequences of doing so would be at the sort of societal level, or whatever level in aggregate that you're referencing or you have in mind. And what those consequences would be is an empirical question that I just can't access through a discussion. We'd have to go sit down and do a bunch of work.
Right, and I mean that's almost like, I mean, the amount of work that it would take to actually test it either way, like you would have to change your whole society, and of course you can't do that. So, uh, like,
Yeah, you might, and
well,
so it might be
yeah,
infeasible.
maybe if I become like the dictator of the country, and I create like a whole education system, but I wouldn't want to do that anyway because
It doesn't have to be that bleak. It's possible that there are elements of the suggestion that you could empirically test in isolation or in some sort of temporary mode, like you like get a group of people together and train them in this certain style of thinking or speaking, and then see if that promotes more cooperative behavior within that group relative to a control group. Maybe there's an experiment. It might even take a month on an island, where the people are really able to only interact with one another or something like that. It might be possible to test elements of this. All I'm saying is that I'm not saying it's untestable. I'm saying that to the extent that an engineering proposal is intended to have positive or negative consequences, for me, those are largely going to come down to empirical questions that it would be difficult to adjudicate via discussion alone. And so we can only get so far by talking about it. That's all. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that for now. but certainly in the future we could return to this topic. I have no issue with that. So I'll leave it to you to leave a final word, and then I have to head out. I have this thing that I have to go to in like 1 minute,
Oh
but
yeah.
I got a couple minutes. So if you want to just say whatever.
No, I mean, thank you so much for having me on. I mean, it's been my first time being on YouTube, like having my voice on YouTube. It's a very surreal experience, but I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate that you consider like just my ramblings to be valuable enough for this stream. I really appreciate that. And yeah, like with regard to our discussion, I think I mean, you know, the main thing I'm committed to is that we need some kind of framework to be able to resolve moral disagreements. And so I do think that some forms of anti-realism just cannot achieve that, and I think that's a problem. But I don't think that's a problem with your form of anti-realism necessarily. And the fact that you were willing to like talk in terms of negotiation already shows me, like, already alleviates a lot of the concerns I had about your position, because it means that you're willing to actually take seriously the question of, okay, you know, what can we do to actually be able to have moral exchanges and moral conversation. And I think that was my main concern, and you've addressed that. So I think we've made a lot of progress.
Awesome. Yeah. So I do think that there's, and we could just pick this up another time. But yeah, I do not think that my particular perspective on like moral truth is in any way an impediment to devising effective ways for people to like live together productively in society, or to engage in moral discourse or anything like that. And there may be viable conceptual engineering projects that I would get on board with, and we might even find a broad agreement with what sorts of things it would be good to do, what we'd want to do, what we think the facts, like the non-moral facts related to doing that, would be. So there might just be not that much disagreement between us.
Wonderful. Well, I think those are the best kind of debates, when we start off from seemingly very, very different positions, and then it turns out we're actually closer than we thought.
Yeah, that's often a great one. And that's a good note to end on. Often I feel like I started this off kind of grumpy and angry about
right.
like arguments that I've seen, but this is a good way to end. Okay, so I guess I will see you around. I do got to wrap it up
definitely
here, but thanks so much for being here. This was a lot of fun. I liked the one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. And
Yeah,
I'll
right,
keep. I'll still be in the chat, of course.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right, everybody. That's gonna have to wrap it up for us for now. So I gotta head out. So I will just play the exit screen. So thanks so much, everybody, for being here. I hope this was an entertaining one. I feel honestly I'm a little tired today because I was out most of the day. And now I have another event to go to. So, all right, I'm out of here. Thanks so much. Please like, subscribe, leave comments, do all the things, and share the video, whatever you got to do. All right, take care, everybody.